everybody. I'm Larissa, and I'd like to share a story with you guys today about a time that I chose to put myself in isolation. I'm talking about the 10-day Vipassana silent retreat, and it was a life-changing experience for me. It was really cool to see the lessons that came out of my suffering. And I had a really hard time when I was there because I kept getting caught up. I wasn't listening to the directions of just go back to breath, like keep going back to breath and let whatever's coming up come up and focus on breath. And instead of doing that, I would get really caught up in the suffering, like in the pain that was coming up or in the stories that I had going on in my mind. And so even though I had those experiences, I still got a lot out of going to the training. And so it's neat because we're in this like forced isolation right now, which can be, we can turn it into a tool for reflection and for learning about them, or for learning about ourselves. So I want to share a couple of stories with you. The first story is so in Vipassana training, you're not supposed to talk to each other. You're not supposed to make eye contact. You're supposed to hand in everything that like could distract you. So if it's like books or back then CD player, like a Discman or Walkman, anything like that, you turn it in so you don't get distracted. You also let go of any practices you have around like yoga or exercise. They invite you to just like walk and be mindful as you're walking, not treat it as an exercise. And the purpose of this is to help you to become totally present in what the practice of breath work offers, so that you can see breath work working on its own, rather than perhaps thinking that the transformation that happens is because of something else. So really it's quite an empowering thing to do, is recognize that your breath alone can help you transform your life. So the first story I want to share is, I think it was like the second day where I had already like been alone with my thoughts for a day. And there was a group of girls who were sitting, some of them were sitting, some were standing in a field or like in this like grassy area. And the sun was shining and people were enjoying the sun. And I wanted to go and enjoy the sun also, but I felt like I had this like pain inside of me about if it was okay for me to go and do it. Like, was I good enough or beautiful enough, or would I fit in? And so there was that feeling coming up. And there was this girl standing there, and she had her arms out, and she was like turned to the sun, and she was just like taking in sunlight, which is when I was alone, like or at my cottage or anything like that, I had no problem like just being present. But now in this moment of all this discomfort coming up, and this like field full of other girls, like what would people think of me if I went and stood in the sun the way I wanted to, the way she was? And so I started to get really angry with her. Like, I hadn't talked to her. I'd never met her before. She was like far enough away that I couldn't see her face. Like, it's not like she like gave me a bad look or anything like that. But I got so angry, and I didn't have any awareness about it at the time, other than like, who's that girl? And so this story started running inside of me. And so fast forward, actually I'll tell you the second story first, and then I'll wrap them both up, because the awareness for both of them came on the same day. So later on in the retreat, I was walking down a path, and with walking down the path, there was someone else coming the opposite direction. And she looked like someone that I went to university with. And that person in university, I perceived, did something like against me. And I still at the time had a lot of anger toward her. And so I'd never met this girl who's walking on the path before, but she reminded me of this other girl. And so all of the anger that I was holding toward that other girl, I started to direct at this other girl that this girl had never seen before, but now she was like the recipient of all my internal angst and anger. And in my mind, I was like saying these terrible things to her, and anytime I passed her during this retreat, these feelings would come up, and I would just be so angry. And so I kept having experiences like that throughout the retreat. And well, for the first 6 days, I was miserable, and it's not because of anything the retreat center does. Like, the retreat center is perfect. It was just all of this pain and hurt and suffering and stuff that I hadn't worked through, and I didn't have the tools to work through at the time, was emerging. And the tool that you use in that scenario is the breath work. But I was getting so caught up that I wasn't using the breath work. So fast forward through the retreat, around day 6, things started to shift, and I'll share those stories later, but the entire retreat was challenging. But on the last day, you begin to integrate with the other people who are at the retreat. And so before you like get put back into society, you're allowed to talk to each other. And so it's the last day, everyone sort of talks to each other and says, how did it go? You know, are you going to do it again? What did you learn? And so this guy comes up to me and he's like, how did the retreat go? Like, how, you know, what did you take away from it? Was it good? Did you have a good time? I was like, no, man, like I was suffering like most of the time. It was pretty terrible. And he's like, me too. And I was like, oh yeah, like it was miserable. And so he told me, he said it was, but I had these moments of having really wonderful like relief. And I was like, oh, like what? He's like, well, there was this one day where the girls were sitting in the field and it was sunny, and there was this girl who was standing out there with her arms out and just moving in the sunlight like a little flower. It was so beautiful. And I was like, oh my God, that's the same girl that I hated. Like, I didn't tell him that because I didn't want to be judged, and I was embarrassed that I like was so angry with this person that I'd never met before. But he had seen her as so beautiful and bringing hope and bringing light and presence, and I was like, I didn't want to see her, talk to her ever again. I was so angry with her. And so I had this awareness that I'd never had before about how one circumstance it doesn't really have any meaning until the perceiver receives it a certain way, until the perceiver, later I understood through their belief systems, will filter an experience to bring meaning out, for something to heal, for something inside of us that is an opportunity to look at and resolve. And so that was the first awareness, was just that, like, it's all based on the receiver. It's all based on our judgments of the person, our judgments of the experience and what we think they're doing or what it means. And so fast forward, that girl that I kept walking by on the path, she came up to me at the end of the training, and she, like, I forget what she did. I don't know if she like touched my shoulders or took my hands, but she made some sort of physical contact to convey warmth. And so she says to me, she's like, meanwhile, this is the girl that I was just in my head swearing at and hated and like throwing like, you know, imaginary, like, I don't know, snowballs at or something. I don't know. Anyway, so she says, you know, I just have to tell you, when I was having a hard time in the retreat and I was like feeling really challenged, I would just look at it's just she's like, I would just look at you and you looked so peaceful that it really like gave me hope and meaning for being okay, like that I could make it through. Meanwhile, I was like the angriest mofo there in my mind. And so it's again like this experience of, it's all based on us as the receiver. How are we labeling the actions? What are we perceiving as happening? What does it remind us of? And so I started to learn at that point, if we could experience things so differently, what was the truth? What was the truth for me? There was a different truth for her. And so I started to look at the pain that was related to those experiences. So that girl who was standing, like, I love that the sun is shining in right now. That girl, oh, and the last thing was the flower. The girl who was the flower, she came up to me and she said the same thing about like perceiving me as being peaceful, where I was like perceiving her as being like the biggest jerk in the world. And so it's not that I was peaceful. It's just, you know, they were in that state, and there was some sort of entanglement with us in the moment. And so, and that was, I didn't have the words for it at the time, but that was when I really started to understand that we're all connected in ways that we have no idea about, and we're consistently responding to each other in ways that we can't even comprehend. And so through those experiences, what I started to recognize was that if I'm having that experience, where's the pain inside of me? Like that girl standing so beautifully in the field, like I can see that now. But in the moment, like I wanted to be doing what she was doing. And so I was like upset with her that she was doing it. She had like the confidence to do it. The other thing was like, if I'm so upset right now, like how dare you be happy? And there was just this story running about, about who I was and who she was. And none of it was true. And all of the judgments I had of this other girl, all of this anger I had toward the girl in university that I didn't even remember. It wasn't something I would think about often. But then I see this girl who reminds me of the girl from university, and it all comes up. And so it helped me to see, like, oh, like that happened before. How do I work through that discomfort from university? Because I know it's not about this girl. And just seeing the things that I was creating in my mind, like the chaos that I was creating based on these past experiences. And based on like my pain, my hurt, my feelings of lack inside. And so now what I work to do is, like, it's such a cool thing that we're in isolation, because you may be in isolation with family and you may be like triggered like crazy. And if you are, like, how can you use that right now as a tool? It doesn't mean ignore the feelings that are coming up, but let those feelings be an indicator for you about where to look. If you're having extreme emotions come up right now, what is the scenario where those emotions are coming up? What does it guide you to look at right now? And so yeah, those are two experiences I had at Vipassana while in silence for 10 days, in isolation. And though I chose to go into that isolation and I chose to go into that silence, it really was transformational for my life. And so if you're in this isolation right now, whether you're by yourself or you're with other people, what's coming up for you that you can look at, that you can start to own inside of yourself instead of blaming someone else for? Like, in my mind at the time, I thought it was like the flower girl that was making me so angry, and it had nothing to do with her. I thought it was the girl walking down the path that made me so angry, and it had nothing to do with her. It had nothing to do with the girl from university either. It was just each person was a mirror for me to look inward, to see my pain, to see the things that were holding me back in my life, and to invite me to think differently about things. So if you have anything coming up right now that you're willing to look at and see how it's there as a lesson or an opportunity for knowing yourself better, I'd love to hear about it in the comments, or if you want to make a video and share. It's like really bright right now. I'm just gonna yeah, so like, if there's anything that you're learning to be just like more present with, and see how you feel, like see what comes up for you in those moments. I'd love to just have that share with each other. I'm distracted because I'm like blinded by the light. Anyway, I'm gonna go and talk to the mouse that lives in my house. And if you feel the need to cut your bangs or cut your hair, as I have, I recommend giving yourself enough length that it can be fixed later. I love you guys so much. I will make a video soon and maybe get a curtain for that window. Okay, bye for now.